There's been a great deal of attention to the subject of climate change and Hurricane Harvey, and I thought it would be useful to explore the actual messaging around that topic that's been coming out in a whole series of news sources. Not to challenge the science, not to defend the science, not even to really explore the science, but simply to explore how the science is being messaged and what people are hearing about the topic from different news media. So it's pretty well understood what the potential implications are and linkages are between climate change and a hurricane. And this is taken from some of the press coverage of the topic. And so there are four issues that I'll cover. One is the issue of sea level rise and storm surge. One is the issue of intensification of rainfall, intensification of the storm itself and winds, and then the steering and stalling of Hurricane Harvey. Now, how am I doing this? We're using the climate web for this. I'm not going to explore it in any detail right now, but just show you how we've done it. First, we've pulled together a whole series of news stories. Now, none of this is from wacko sources. These are established news sources quoting established scientists from various places. And so there's no attempt here to pull in sort of weird blogs on one side or the other of this issue. Now, we've gone through those news stories and pulled out sort of key quotes, key discussions of this issue of linking climate change and Hurricane Harvey. You can simply see where we've pulled out things here and how many we've pulled out. Then we can grab all of those things that we've pulled out into one place in a knowledge base that we call climate change and Harvey. And you can actually go in and explore any of these. If you click on any of these individually, you'll see that it links right back to the original story that it came from, and the original story's URL is there. So you can trace all of this back to the source. And if you hover over the thumbnail that you see, it actually will pop up on the screen. So you can read the quote easily without having to actually go back and find that quote in the coverage itself. So going ahead and jumping right into the four issues that we're looking at. First question of storm surge, which is obviously related to sea level rise. And this one there really wasn't that much discussion on, and it was pretty consistent. This piece talks about 1.5 feet of extra water. Other pieces talked about 8 inches, 6 inches of extra storm surge due to sea level rise, but all in the same direction and all pretty consistent, although no real discussion of the reality that in some cases, 1 foot of storm surge could be catastrophic. In other cases, 1 foot of storm surge could be inconsequential. It really depends on what it's surging into, but very little inconsistency there. Now, let's jump forward into the topic of how much more precipitation. And here the messaging is truly confusing across different sources. So you have sort of, a little more rain perhaps, to a lot of discussion of sort of this 3%, 5%, 10% increase in moisture loading due to a warmer atmosphere, all the way up to the human contribution could be 30% of the total rainfall. And so you can explore these, but anywhere from basically almost no impact to up to a third of the impact. So a very significant spread of messaging there. What about the intensification of Harvey as it approached the coast? Again, anywhere from, yes, climate change caused Harvey to intensify to, we would expect there to be some intensification of storms by the end of this century. One source has 2% to 11% increase in hurricane peak winds by the end of this century. But of course, we're not at the end of the century. And so a wide discrepancy, so to speak, between the messaging on what actually happened with Hurricane Harvey. The issue of what stalled Hurricane, again, very wide-ranging from we can say absolutely nothing about that with today's science to the stalling was completely consistent with climate models. And so again, a very wide range there. And so when you put all this together, what's the bottom line regarding Harvey and climate change in terms of the messaging that we saw coming out of the storm? And again, it ranges all the way from, well, we can't link any given storm to climate change at all necessarily, to, well, it probably made it a little more strong, a little longer lasting, to, well, climate change obviously was largely responsible for Hurricane Harvey. So, again, a very wide range on the issue of the bottom line and Hurricane Harvey. So, did Hurricane Harvey seal the climate deal? Again, I'm not talking about the science here. I'm talking about the messaging and how that feeds through, and is it likely to have influenced public thinking in a way that sealed the deal? And frankly, it's very hard to see why one would expect that to happen based on the coverage that was reported. And I'm not even saying that these are correct quotes from everyone, but this is what was being reported. And I think that Richard Alley's quote that I have here is interesting in the sense that a lot of what we're seeing might really simply be intended to feed into confirmation bias of one group or another, because a group that sees climate change at signal here certainly can find enough coverage to support its views, and the opposite is true, and people arguing that scientists are totally exaggerating everything, they can certainly find plenty of stuff in this record. And that's without even getting to some of the news sources that went to Ed Maibach and Renee Lertzman to talk about sort of how these messages actually get communicated and whether they actually work, and the suggestion from Renee Lertzman that this kind of messaging actually doesn't work. And so we're sort of back into what you might consider sort of a circular firing squad here in terms of how people concerned about climate change are talking about and communicating this issue. So in terms of that, you can go in and explore this yourself in the climate web, and you'll see that in a couple of slides, what the links are. I will also note that the climate web includes lots of information on sort of the communications challenges of climate change, and can help support conversations that are trying to bring together the hurricane science and the hurricane communications in useful ways. And here are some links that you can use to that end in terms of learning about how to use the climate web, jumping right into the climate web. And I would certainly welcome your feedback on this piece.